One, two, three, four.
Hello, you're listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. We are a general interest independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. This year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to close our store and cancel in-person events. But Skylight is your neighborhood bookstore, and we are finding ways to create community even while we're far apart. In the coming weeks, we'll be putting out lots of new audio content to help you discover new books, connect with authors, and check in with your favorite booksellers. To learn more about how you can help keep Skylight alive, please visit our website at skylightbooks.com or check out our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
Welcome, everybody. Can you hear me? So glad you're joining us from all over the place, from Brooklyn, from Atwater. We've got folks all over, from Chicago. Not much further ado, let me jump in. Very excited about our guest today. We have, in conversation with Meredith, we have today Amber Tamblyn. Amber is an Emmy and Golden Globe nominated actress, writer, director, and the author of 6 books, including the critically acclaimed bestseller Era of Ignition, Coming of Age in a Time of Rage and Revolution. She's a contributing writer for the New York Times and a founding member of the Time's Up organization. And so Amber will be here today in conversation with Meredith, who is really the reason why we're gathered. Meredith is an award-winning author and journalist who is the founding executive editor of Them, a Condé Nast LGBTQ+ digital platform where she is now a contributing editor. She's contributed to other books, including the New York Times bestseller Not That Bad, edited by Roxane Gay, Nasty Women, and Burn It Down. She writes frequently for the New York Times, The Guardian, The Atlantic, Wired, Condé Nast Traveler, and many other publications. And the occasion for the gathering is Meredith's new memoir, FAIREST. FAIREST is a memoir about a precocious boy with albinism, a sun child from a rural Philippine village. Yes, we got it in the screen there, beautiful cover. Who would grow up to become a woman in America, navigating complex spheres of race, class, sexuality, and her place within the gay community. A lot of beautiful praise coming in for the book already. I'll just share Ocean Vuong's words, which I think are particularly lovely. Ocean Vuong calls it a marvel of a story wrought with near archaeological precision and deep inquiry into history, hope, joy, and human redemption. An artist's statement that offers new ways to think and feel in bodies cast ashore. So with great warmth and excitement, I'm going to turn it over to Meredith to read a little bit from FAIREST. Thanks for being here.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see people's faces. It's wonderful to virtually meet all of you. I look forward to answering some of your questions maybe later so that we can interact. So my memoir is FAIREST, and I am a Filipino person with albinism. And because I have albinism, I'm actually my vision isn't that great. So even though I have the book in front of me, I'm actually going to be reading from my iPad so that my font is enlarged. I can usually read regular books, but I get nervous when I read. So it feels safer for me to have large font. And then the way that the book is structured, it kind of follows my life chronologically from the Philippines to being a gay man while I was in undergrad at Harvard to the point of my transition, but interspersed among those chronological sections are sort of flash forwards to how my actions or, what I was thinking about, in those particular times, relatively long ago have affected my life, more recently. And this section is one of those self-contained flash forward sections that comes right after I talk about the ways in which I was coming into a consciousness of being found attractive as a gay man, yet that attractiveness is predicated on me being perceived as white rather than Filipino, which is the actual race that I am. So, so that's the background. May 2014, a month after I published my first article about being trans, I woke up at dawn between two naked men on the top floor of a townhouse in Park Slope. I'd followed the rules of straight womanhood for over a decade, and it hadn't made me happy. So I wanted to test my boundaries, push myself to be with people in ways I hadn't before. That was when Barrett and Jason came along, a bisexual couple I met online who were interested in dating a woman. I turned on my side to face Barrett, the one with whom I felt a stronger romantic attachment. Jason felt more like a friend I enjoyed having sex with. Bald and a decade older than me, Barrett had left his own rural upbringing in Alabama to become a modern dancer and interactive artist in New York, which led to a career as a digital consultant and allowed him to unexpectedly come into wealth. He and Jason didn't know I was trans when we first met, but I sent them one of my articles and, as I had hoped, they treated my gender as a non-issue. Barrett opened his eyes and smiled. I could tell they were hazel, but not much else, though I'd examined plenty of close-up eye pictures before and filled in details with my mind. Dark rings around his irises, dilated pupils because of the dim dawn light, and, maybe a little bit, his attraction to me. He tilted his head to indicate that we should leave the room together, and I followed him down a set of wooden stairs with steel pipes for rails, part of this couple's industrial aesthetic in a house they designed and renovated themselves. "I'll get us some coffee," he whispered as he proceeded to the kitchen on the ground floor while I stayed on the second, an open area lined with bookshelves, a peacock green velvet couch on one side, and a mid-century dining table on the other. Off that big room was a smaller room they used for guests. I noticed that the door was open, so I went inside. Barrett and Jason also used the room as a walk-in closet. I noticed a shelf of stylish shoes on one side and suits on wooden hangers. On another end of the room was a giant mirror, framed in ornate gold leaf, leaning against the wall. I stood in front of it and looked at myself as morning light illuminated my body, and recalled how comfortable I'd been walking around nude in Barrett's presence. It was a relief to feel safe without clothes on in front of someone else, after years of asking men to turn lights off for fear they would find something overly masculine about my body, my too slim hips, my muscular shoulders and back from years of lifting weights, a fear that did not go away even when men admired that body for being powerful and athletic. "Admiring yourself again?" Barrett asked as he poked his head into the room, then went in to stand behind me. "I'm sure it feels great to be almost 40 and have the breasts of a teenager." I laughed, not just at the joke, but at the openness of our relationship. The past decade, when I decided to be private about my transition, except to those I was closest to, the men I'd been involved with had accepted my history as fact, but had also been all too willing to deny its reality, something never to be discussed again once revealed. Though really, I was more responsible for this than they were, because their reticence was an echo of my own shame, my silence like trying to suffocate my history by refusing to breathe. It was such a relief to exhale. "It's funny," Barrett continued as he stared at my reflection. "I know you're trans, but I can't really tell. It's a lot harder to see you're an Asian man when I can't see you as Asian to begin with. To me, you're just a woman with a dancer's body." I nodded. I knew by woman, he meant white woman. I wanted to be pleased, but was surprised at myself that I wasn't. We left the room and had coffee at the dining table, but Barrett's words kept playing in my head. "I don't see you as trans," coupled with, "I can't tell you're Asian." The way he looked at me was exactly what I'd honed over many years, this trick of perception, and it puzzled me that I was dissatisfied over having accomplished it, a state of being so many trans women sacrifice so much to achieve. Maybe I didn't feel the satisfaction because I hadn't sacrificed enough, only had reassignment surgery, hadn't touched my face or gotten implants. The remaining undisclosed for a decade was burden enough, so it wasn't that. It was something about how my gender and race reflected on each other like a dizzying hall of distorted mirrors. When people looked at me and only saw a white person, I understood that being white wasn't actually better, that I only coveted whiteness because of what I associated it with: wealth, education, and beauty. But for someone like me, whose whiteness was literally skin deep, who did not have any meaningful European ancestry, to be perceived as white could only mean that whiteness is nothing more than an illusion. In an ideal world, I wouldn't need to go through so much effort, make so many sacrifices to gain the privileges of whiteness, and other brown people who are not albino would have just as much access to those privileges if they wanted it. I flinched when Barrett told me he only saw me as a woman, because my experience with race forced me to understand that womanhood wasn't real either. I wanted to be a woman because I wanted other people to perceive my qualities through the lens of that gender. But having molded myself to their expectations, I now understood how much of an illusion gender was too. To become a woman in the world's eyes, I made what felt like a huge sacrifice at the time, reassignment surgery, but in hindsight was really a cosmetic change, not unlike a nose job, a shift in the body part's aesthetic appearance while keeping its function intact. The only difference was the meaning our society invested in one part versus the other. Had I lived in a world where men were allowed to dress and behave like women without being scorned or punished, I wouldn't have needed to be a woman at all. Over the following months, I grew alienated from Barrett and eventually stopped dating him, not because he did anything terrible, but I just didn't want to see myself through his eyes. I came to understand that what I wanted was to be seen as my complete self, my gender, my race, my history, without being judged because of it. I wanted people close to me to see an albino person who had learned how to look and act white so the world would more readily accept her and understand how that had been a key part of her survival. I wanted people to see how that albino person was also transgender and that she transitioned to be able to express her femininity and had surgery so she would be perceived as being like any other woman, her qualities appreciated on those terms. And if she ever hid who she actually was, it was only so that she could be granted entrance into worlds she couldn't otherwise reach, worlds that should rightfully belong to everyone, not just those who happen to uphold the prevailing standards of whiteness and womanhood. Thanks. That's probably the most political or like explicitly political I get in the book.
That actually feels very apropos and perfect for the moment that we are in, especially here in the United States. Thank you for reading that. I was struck by a few things that you said, most especially the idea of an echo of one's own shame, which I think is something that is universal and understood, even if that is an echo of lack of understanding or of an awakening, being in the state of awakening, which I think this country is perpetually in, but especially right now, in the many ways that it was in 2017 with 2017's Me Too movement and everything that was coming out then about sexual assault and harassment for men and women and non-binary people. And so I love you, first of all. You're my friend.
Yes.
My neighbor. Or Marlo loves you. My daughter loves you. You're one of the most extraordinary people I've ever known. And I'm lucky to know you. I was lucky to have been introduced to you several years ago. And you are like a true intersection. When we talk about the word of intersectionality, you are the ultimate intersection. That is, to me, what is so powerful about you. If there's anyone that can get people, any given person, anybody, no matter who you are, no matter what you are, no matter how you identify, your lived experience, your life, your grief, your joy, your sex, your anything, I feel like you are at the intersections of all of those things, which is really powerful. So I want to talk to you just a little bit first about coming into practice with writing this book as a writer, already a writer who is known, who's done so many incredible things for them and,
many different outlets, but just talking about the craft of this book and creating it and talking about such a personal story, you know, in the book, for those of you who haven't read it yet, but when you do read it, there's a lot of also like deeply personal story about your relationship with your mother. This is also a love story between men and people who don't understand you, whether it's a sexual relationship or a personal relationship or an emotional relationship or a spiritual relationship. I mean, it's really powerful. So just talk a little bit about the creation of that and the stepping into writing that.
Yeah, I think one of the things, there were a couple of steps. I mean, by the time that I started working on the book, this was in 2017, I had already been writing about trans issues for several years, both as an opinion writer and as an editor, like in all of these different contexts. And it was really important. Can people hear me, by the way? I saw Amber's screen freeze, so I thought there might be a problem. And one of the things that I realized as I was doing that was that basically so much of what I was doing was in the service of a cisgender public, right? You know, like I was writing, every essay that I wrote was usually tied to a specific news event, right? You know, like relating my personal history in order to explain to people like how trans people experience these things, how trans people experience it when, you know, people only say good things about Caitlyn Jenner because she's beautiful, not because of anything else, which implies that if she weren't beautiful, she wouldn't be as accepted, you know, like whether those types of issues or, you know, or writing investigative pieces about violence against transgender women in order to get a general public to understand that, you know, that it is an ongoing and deep crisis in our country. And so I think I had this really strong impetus to write something for me, to be able to, and that intuitively that itself was a political act, right? The fact being able to tell my story to myself, explain myself to myself on my own terms. Right. Which is, which is a privilege that white cisgender authors just have, right? Because when you write from a place of white cisgender privilege, you don't need to assume that there are people who don't understand your experience, or that you don't need to feel like you have to justify your existence to people. And I think that, and one of the things that I notice is that memoirs that have stood the test of time, you know, are like that because they don't have to reduce or simplify a narrative for an audience that doesn't understand. So I think that was really kind of like the germ of me wanting to write the memoir in this particular way. And one of the things that I found as I was working on it is that whenever I initially wrote scenes, a lot of the time I would write them in a way that felt to me like I had read it from somewhere, or this is what society is expecting me to say about, you know, like one particular issue of being trans. And I had to engage in a real process of like probing my memories and probing my experiences in order to come to my own conclusions about what my experiences related to those events are actually like. And a story that I tell that's related to that is I was deeply in love with this child star in the Philippines. Her name was Lea Salonga, and she's now, you know, like a big Broadway star. She was the voice of Mulan and Jasmine. But I knew her, you know, like when I was 6 years old, and she was like a child star, a child singer in the Philippines. And I first wrote the scene that's sort of like a classic trans discovery scene. It's like you see a girl and you want to be the girl, and suddenly you want to be a girl. And, and I wrote that scene and I said to myself, no, that actually was not how I felt when I was a kid. Like, I was actually fine, and pretty happy, being a boy. But what I very clearly remember saying to myself was, I wouldn't mind being a girl if I had that girl's voice, right? Like, that was the specific thing that I felt about Lea Salonga at the time, was that yes, I'm a boy, but like, if I had her voice, then I would I would be totally fine being a girl, which is just my specific experience, right?
And that is the intersection of those experiences and the universality of it that is so powerful to me. And what's so amazing about this book, I'm gonna hold it up here, there it is, Fairest. I mean, what's so incredible about it is that it just feels like the journey of an extraordinary purpose and meaning without ever intending for it to be that. And you sort of, meaning you had a normal life. Like in this book, this book is a love story. I've said that to you many times. Like, I was shocked when I read it. I was like, I was really drawn into the love story of it and the aspect of the relationships that you had with different men who were, while you were finding yourself in the purpose of that, but under this extraordinary guise, because you were growing and sort of becoming who you were in a way that most people will never understand. One of the most interesting things I took away from an early conversation that you and I had, Meredith and I had a conversation that was printed for my book, Era of Ignition, which was the most received, the most feedback that I got from that book was about our conversation. And I think for most people, the sense that you had an understanding of sexism. You knew what it had been like to be a man in some situation and to have sort of an understanding of what it was like to be a woman, but then also what it's like to be a woman and to be trans, and what it's like to view being trans under a cis lens, and all of those things, which is what I talk about when I say the intersection. That's really powerful. So I always direct people to your work, and certainly your book, but your other writing, when they're struggling with trying to understand their own privilege, any of us, and the way in which we don't really realize that what we have, and even, by the way, you're absolutely right. For me, as a cis white woman, the ability to write Era of Ignition and to just be angry about the basic things I've been through, but to never have to think about a lens through which I have to write it is so real. It's so real. Like, the anger is about something else that's over here that's happened to me far away. But even the writing in and of itself feels free. Like, I feel free to say what I want. I have to figure out what I have to say. So, I mean, with that, and especially, I want to talk a little bit about, the identity of whiteness, and specifically your identity with whiteness, which is so different. You've said to me, and it's true, you have lived this way and you've acted this way, this is who you are, that, you're a woman of color and you are under the guise of whiteness. And I want you to just talk a little bit about what that has meant for your life in general. But also, I think maybe in this particular moment that we're living in with police brutality and the death of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, I'm just fascinated to know how you feel. What are your thoughts in this particular moment?
Yeah, I mean, definitely one of the things, there are a number of, really, really complicated feelings around my specific relationship and my specific proximity to whiteness that I feel, on a daily basis, but also especially now, right? One of those things is I always feel like I understand both sort of like a certain both white psychology and non-white psychology, and in ways that, each of those groups don't understand each other.
Right.
And yet I also don't belong to either of those groups fully, because of, the legacy of white supremacy in our country, right? So, so during that period of the protests, I found myself actually just really at sea a lot of the time, because of the fact that I recognized myself in certain ways that, white people have behaved and, been held accountable, and have, and I was engaged in that sort of in a similar process of holding myself accountable for the things that I've said and done and thought, et cetera, et cetera. And yet at the same time, I also felt this really, really deep-seated, sense of just anger and, rage, really, because, because a lot of white passing people, I think most white passing people have a familial relationship, ancestral relationship to Europe. And I don't have that, right? And also I don't, I grew up in the Philippines. I didn't come to the States when I was 15. So my fundamental emotional makeup is still as an indigenous immigrant, a Filipino indigenous immigrant person who immigrated to the States from a really rural part of the US, and has come to understand the ways in which colonialism and white supremacy has, emotionally and psychologically ravaged my country, right? I think there's been a lot of discussion around model, Asian people as model minorities, but Filipinos were, were called the N-word, habitually by white Americans through at least the 1930s. There were anti-miscegenation laws that localities tried to enact against Filipino people. Filipino people have been lynched, right? Not obviously, our experiences, can't really compare to the, just the enormous and deep legacy of slavery and its aftermaths. But I think for me, experiencing both of those reckonings, it was almost like a double reckoning simultaneously, just left me flat.
Yeah.
It was, and also at the same time, because we've moved upstate, we don't actually have a place in New York City anymore. And, there are people around me who are immunosuppressed. We had to make the difficult decision not to join the protests. I went to some socially distanced protests in the Catskills, but my community, especially my communities of color, my queer communities of color, I still located in New York City. So that also, felt really difficult and distanced.
Yeah.
And so, but so the current moment is just focalizing what I feel all the time, which is that I constantly recognize ways in which I behave like a privileged white person, and also am constantly in a state of really deep-seated anger whenever I see racism. And both of those things are operating simultaneously for me, really, really often.
I think it's really good then that you are married to a brilliant, incredible massage therapist who can maybe help process that.
Yes. Being married to a healer definitely, definitely it does wonders for for my mental health.
I want to, before I sort of open it up to some questions, everybody, if you just want to think about any questions you might have, and what I'll do is I will open up the screen to all of us, and just put your hand up like this, and I'll maybe call on you, and we'll open up your mic and you can ask a question. But I did want to ask the sort of glaring question of the moment, which is about, you know, people who we adore and have a lot of love for, whether that's in the literary world or the, you know, creative entertainment worlds, in any world really, choosing this moment to be transphobic. And I'm talking about J.K. Rowling's, and just wanting to know your thoughts or feelings on that. But also, I think more proactively, ways in which we can fight against that when someone that is so beloved comes out in that way and shows themselves.
Right.
What is it that each of us can do, maybe even besides, you know, just hashtags and, you know, what is easy, what are ways in which we can combat that kind of energy?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think Jen Richards, who is a wonderful actress, I don't know if you know her, wrote this response that I really deeply agreed with, which is that it really, one of the things that was most angering about it for me and a lot of trans people is that it really exposes J.K. Rowling's kind of like deep-seated white feminism, that she would choose this moment, you know, like in order to sort of hog the spotlight when, you know, like we're experiencing this really vital, you know, like really the most important shift in the ways in which we talk about racism and anti-Blackness, not just in this country, but, you know, but worldwide, right? To then come out with all of this transphobic stuff, right? And I think that that's one of the ways in which the two movements are linked, right? Is the way in which she presents herself as the arbiter of like what is universally female, right? And so I think that it's really important for us to be very clear that the TERF ideology is really an offshoot of white supremacist ideology that tries to like define people's, define who people are and determine who people are rather than allowing people to do it for themselves, right? And exerting power over people, and often doing it under the guise of, you know, under the guise of things that are benign, like protection, like, you know, like either the desire for protection or the need for protection, right? And I think that that's, you know, like in conversations that I've been having, that's been an important component of me, you know, of me explaining that. And then the other side of that is definitely to reach out to trans people for whom, you know, J.K. Rowling is an important figure, you know, because there are people who are experiencing, and young people, a lot of young people, young trans people are experiencing deep emotional pain. I saw Jenny Boylan, who is an amazing author, and I'm going to be in conversation with her, talk, you know, online about having like 20-something-year-old children who are just completely heartbroken, right?
Yeah.
And I think sort of like coming to terms with somebody who you deeply love, you know, like for a lot of people, it's sort of a moment of realizing that you can love an artwork, like a piece of art that somebody has created, while at the same time, you know, like really detest what their ideology and what they represent, right? And I think, you know, I think going into those types of conversations right now, if you have a trans person in your life who cares deeply about J.K. Rowling, is really important, because those feelings are really hard to explain away, right? You know, like, and we experience that with so many people, you know. I'm thankfully, you know, like none of my deeply, deeply beloved people have shown themselves to be, to be completely terrible yet, but I'm sort of, I'm kind of bracing myself, or maybe maybe I just like self-justify.
Maybe you chose well. We'll see.
Kevin Spacey, I didn't really like him that much anyway. Oh, who cares about Charlie Rose,
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I think those are such great tools, and I think looking to some of the trans people who are, on the front lines of those conversations is a really great resource. Raquel Willis, there's many who are talking about it. Yeah,
Raquel's really fantastic. There are a number of, UK-based trans people who are amazing.
Actually, if you want to say a couple here, just for folks to like look into.
Yeah, Travis Alabanza, Paris Lees, who's a really, who's one of the leading UK, Sean Fay. There are a lot of people in a UK context because TERF ideology, TERF being trans exclusionary radical feminist for people who are unaware, is much more, kind of deeply entrenched in a UK context. Yeah,
it's also such a, I mean, this J.K. Rowling thing is, not to belabor, but is such a, I think also pinpoints the deeper issues we have as well with the idea of feminism and the lack of intersectionality, the lack of really knowing how to be together and to understand each other and to love each other as, in the name of equality for women or for femininity for that matter. And I think she's, a shining example of someone who thinks she's doing the right thing in her mind.
Because the only way that you can evolve a belief that everybody who is born with a vagina is like universally the same is for you not to be exposed to a bunch of different types of women, right? For 100%. You to posit that as universal, really assumes that you have no notion of intersectionality and the enormous swath of ways that women are, and including an indigenous Filipino context where women and third gender people existed side by side in harmony, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's kind of the ultimate privilege, I mean, is to be able to disclude who exactly gets to define themselves as women. And you're exactly right. And when we're talking about those equalities, when we're talking about, when we say feminism is about the equality of the sexes, well, we kind of disclude whose sex matters, who gets to qualify as a sex or not a sex, or everyone makes their own rules and opinions up about it. And unfortunately, she kind of falls under a lot of what we're seeing now with I think the unearthing too in the police brutality and the protests that we've been seeing, the anti-racism protests and rallies, is very much that same thing. Is it's kind of this this awakening, and we're seeing people who are going to fight against it and people who are going to take a moment and be uncomfortable and sit in the discomfort of questioning what they thought was the best that they knew, and having to maybe mind that and think differently about the way they're showing up in their own lives, but also in their beliefs. That's hard, and that's hard to do, but it's so necessary, which is why I'm all about defunding the police. And on that note,
yes.
I'd like to open it up
with my police officer brother-in-law.
Sorry, not sorry. I'd like to open it up to you guys. We're here in New York.
Amber, there is a raise hand feature.
Oh, there is?
That they can click, so you don't have to like.
Why are you
I don't know if everybody knows where it is, but
just put the instructions in the chat for those who want to do that.
You guys you're so ahead of me. Okay, there's a raise hand feature. I'm looking for it. It's in the chat.
If you, the instructions for it are in the chat. If you click participants at the bottom of your window, a little box will open up, and on the right side, you should be able to click a little blue raise hand. And if you,
Wow, I found
should
it,
be
you
able to see
guys.
those, Amber, if you can.
Okay,
let me know.
great. Let's
Or
see.
you can also just ask Agnes to call on people if it's the other.
Yes, totally. Agnes, if you want to start, I'm going to look down through this list.
Great, totally. Let's start with Falling James. Do you have something you want to say?
Falling!
I'm unmuting you. Or it looks like you have to unmute yourself. I'm trying to, but you're not.
Oh, I see the hand. I'm unmuting. I'm trying.
Nope.
It's not? Oh no, you're unmuted. I think
Yep.
you're good.
Hello?
Hi.
Take it away.
Oh, we could hear you a minute ago. Are you there, Falling?
I'm not hearing you. I'm gonna yes, did you want to, oh, it looks like you, let's move on to Wendy. Okay, oh, great. So Falling, why don't you, can you type your question in the chat?
Yeah,
I'm going to
great.
move on to Wendy, but let you type your question. We can get to it. Wendy N. All right, you should be unmuted, Wendy.
Hello, hi, I'm Wendy. I'm joining from Long Beach, California. I wanted to, first of all, thank both of you for holding this conversation in this difficult time and being willing to discuss really challenging issues. I think a lot of people, myself included, in all the craziness of the world currently, have found a lot of healing in either returning to or rediscovering like creative outlets. So I was curious, this question for both Amber and Meredith, if you could share a bit about in your creative processes, when you come across a creative block, what's something that helps with getting you unstuck?
Ooh.
Do you want to field that first?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I am a big proponent of not rushing. I know that there are two bodies of mind as far as writing and creativity, and there are those that think you should write every day, even if it's trash. You should do every day, even if it's trash. For me, I think for me as a writer, it's especially important to sit and listen to what I think and feel before doing that. And I find that that's really important. My writing mentor, one of my writing mentors, Wanda Coleman, the late great Wanda Coleman from Los Angeles, actually. And if you don't know her, she's one of the most extraordinary poets. She's no longer with us, but she was considered the sort of unofficial poet laureate of Los Angeles, which to me is a smack in her face, but it is what it is. She was extraordinary, and she used to say there's no such thing as writer's block, that's when the muse is sleeping, and you have to let her rest. You have to let them rest. You have to let him rest. And what the rest is about sort of absorbing information, absorbing feeling, absorbing thought, just absorption, becoming a giant sponge in a certain way, and then finding a way to express that when you're ready. I know that's such a generalized thing, and it doesn't help in this particular moment of numbness when we all feel very desensitized and also oversensitized. But what I would say is to keep checking in with the voice inside of you. Keep checking in with the voice that knows it wants to say something and knows what it wants to say about, and very much stay in touch with that voice. Even if you're not ready or in the place to write something or do something, but just stay in touch with it. Because that voice is the thing that's ultimately going to guide you to the creative work. You have to protect it, and sometimes that protection looks like silence for yourself. It looks like allowing yourself the intrapersonal quiet to be able to build up what it is you're trying to express, if that makes sense. All of that to say, don't rush it, and to not worry. This idea of like self-care and practicing self-care and taking care includes our work and includes our creativity. And to know that as long as you're staying in touch with the thing that is angry inside of you, the story that wants to be told from you, from your perspective, as long as you're staying in touch and keeping in touch with that, it will come. You just have to trust it, and you have to tell it that you trust it. That's the hard part, because each of us wants to rush. Each of us is told every day, tweet this, hashtag this, post this, be in alignment with this, do this. And we have to consider with the work to hold all of those things at once, but that necessarily doesn't mean that we're going to be able to have output. That's me protecting your output. That's all. Meredith?
Yeah, and I think even though, I'm kind of on the other side of that body, right? In the sense that I'm kind of a creature of habit, like I'm very conditioned to just like wake up in the morning and write something. I also really enjoy, like being aimless, right? That it isn't, that it isn't in periods when I don't, like I don't necessarily feel like I can work seriously on the project that I happen to be working on. I just enjoy, like writing. Writing to me is like doodling a lot of the time, like I free write, like various things. Like I just jot down ideas. But, like I have to say that that has been really challenging especially since the protests. And I think definitely, like allowing yourself to spend time away from the echo chamber of the internet is really important. So, so I try to take walks in the woods and, leave my phone. I try to, I try to engage in activities that would at least allow me to be alone with my thoughts for a significant length of time, because because I know that sort of like cacophony is, it's not an environment to be able to sort of re-engage creatively, right? And of course, I also read. That's a really big and important activity.
Let's go to Aya next.
Hello.
Hi.
I really identify with what you said about being this kind of person who I guess is just like so outside of the box that you are constantly finding yourself explaining to cisgender white people why you are the way that you are.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me pull up something that I wrote, a question that I wrote in my journal on Wednesday. And it's like, I don't know that there's a yes or no answer, but I'm really interested, like, just because as someone who's clearly struggled with this, what your thoughts are, if it just brings up anything for you. And
Mm-hmm.
the question is, it's pretty simple. It's, am I centering other people or myself when I spend days trying to imagine a world where they can understand me?
Wow. I just don't imagine people being able to understand me. And personally, and I allow, and I live with that reality, right? There's this really, really amazing Martinician poet and author and critic. His name is Edouard Glissant, Glissant. And he wrote in a book that I love called The Poetics of Relation about the idea of opacity, that actually one of the problems that people often have, and one of the ways in which ideologies like imperialism emerge is when people don't acknowledge that they are in certain ways opaque to each other. Mm-hmm. That this assumption that you can always understand another person is actually an illusion, that you're actually just projecting your understanding of the person. And acknowledging that allows you to be able to accept multiplicity and appreciate multiplicity. So I guess like I don't, I have, in earlier periods in my life, I've definitely struggled with wanting to be like other, wanting to have been born like other people, or, like wanting to have been brown as I was meant to be, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't spend a lot of time trying to get people to, wondering how to get people to understand me, because the process of me trying to understand myself is hard enough. I mean, I think that's, and that's really, like I wrote a whole book in part because of that impetus. Yeah.
Let's go to BJ Boogie and mute you.
I see the clapping emoji. That's so nice. Thank you.
I see the question written if we don't hear.
Yes, it looks like it's typed. BJ Boogie says, can I ask a silly literary question? I finally finished Proust because of you. You start your memoir with a reunion. He ends with one. Also the Sodom and Gomorrah quote. Was Proust at all influential in your writing or merely an inspiration?
I definitely, when I initially I read Swan's Way in college, and I reread it. Shortly after. I reread the entire, all of the 7 volumes of À la recherche du temps perdu. Unfortunately, not in French, in English, even though I've studied French. He's just a little bit too archaic for me. So in a lot of ways, like my writing is definitely in certain ways influenced by French literature. I was a comparative literature PhD student who, and one of my major languages was French. And so yeah, so in a lot of ways I'm definitely influenced by Proust's relationships to memory, the way that he, like the way that he focuses on detail. I am probably at some level influenced by French prose, even though Tagalog prose is also, also consists of a lot of, complex clauses and, sentences that wind around. So it's sort of hard to, I think my prose is probably affected by, by my knowledge of both of those languages. But yeah, like and I love that, I love this, this idea of my book starting out with a reunion and, and Proust ending with one. That's such a wonderful, like literary nugget that I will take with me and that I hadn't thought about.
I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. I see one person has messaged me a private question, which I will share. This person wants to know about Rachel Dolezal, and sort of talking about the experience of her identification as Black and where you think the lines are, whether that was the ways in which that is and isn't okay. Yeah.
My feelings about Rachel Dolezal have certainly become more complicated since I wrote about her, like I think it was in summer of 2015. For people who don't know, Rachel Dolezal is, like is a person who is of European descent, who then, who then pretended, I mean, I'm using loaded words here, who then presented herself as Black and she was found out, and then she claims to have a transracial identity that has this sort of like proximity to to transgender identity. And I think at the time, one of the things that I said was, one of the ways that I talked about it is that trans people, like trans people's identities are more involuntary than racial identity. But I feel like I don't feel the same way as I do now. I think the real difference actually is the fact that, the two genders, the two binary genders, the male and female gender, have a really different relationship with each other compared to whiteness and blackness, right? And that I am not, as a person who is not Black, in a position to be able to make an informed judgment about how Black people should understand or treat Rachel Dolezal's claims of transraciality, right? And I think that's as much as I can, that's as much as I can process right now, I guess.
Take maybe one more question.
If we don't have one, I'll ask the last question.
Please.
Which is, Meredith, I want to know, your life story is so extraordinary, and which is saying so much because you're still so young. Like, there's still so much more to go. It's true, but it's a beautiful book. For anyone that hasn't read it, please order it, and please order from Skylight or your local bookstore, especially if it's an independent bookstore. It is majorly important right now that we support our bookstores. It's very important. But I want to just ask you a little bit, since in the trajectories you've had in your life, both upward and downward, in all of the experiences of your lived experience, what in this moment right now gives you hope? I always like to think at the end of any conversation about hope and the idea of something for us to think about going forward that utilizes that word, whether it's in action, whether it's in emotional grounding, whether it's, in any capacity, hope. What gives you hope for the future, for yourself, for others, for trans people everywhere?
I mean, certainly one of the things that gives me hope is that I see people every day, like challenging themselves to be better, to work, towards a more fair and just world. And as difficult as, as the world is that we're experiencing right now, I also am really, hopeful about the human capacity, to be able to persevere. And I feel like there are ways in which these times of crisis actually exposes, those tendencies, the fact that so many people who are not necessarily in the best financial positions themselves are, are making a lot of economic sacrifices for other people. The ways in which, the people are owning up to the ways that they've been racist, and, various other things that they're owning up to. I think all of that makes me really hopeful that, that we can at least get to places where more people are living just lives, right? Or lives that are more just. And I don't necessarily, I'm not necessarily one of those people who, feels like everything is progressing, right? That it's all about, like this movement towards progress. But I do think that, there's a degree to which we're experiencing a moment in which we're understanding each other better. And I just hope that moment continues. Yeah.
I love that. I think that's a beautiful note and sentiment to end on. Agnes?
Yes, thank you so much, Amber. Thank you, both of you, for being here. Thanks, everyone, for gathering. It's such a treat to have Amber Tamblyn here and Meredith Talusan, whose book is called FAIREST. We hope you'll take a read. And what a nice thing for all of you to come. It's like not always the most delightful thing to be on the screen much longer, but it's nice to gather in these virtual spaces for these kinds of untanglings and reweaving. So thank you so much for being here. And we hope you'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much. Meredith, I'll see you soon for a porch drink.
Yes. Socially distanced.
Socially distanced, but emotionally entangled.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone. Buy Meredith's book. Buy it online, FAIREST.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.